The ER doors burst open. A man is wheeled in chest-soaked red, pulse fading. Doctors shout orders. A nurse in faded scrubs steps forward, voice low and steady. "Let me see him." A surgeon snaps. "Step back, we've got this." The nurse doesn't move. Her eyes lock on the patient's tattoo, 75th Ranger Regiment. Her jaw tightens. Outside, black SUVs roll into the ambulance bay. Men in plate carriers step out, rifles low. One speaks into his radio. "We're looking for Captain Reyes." Inside, the nurse turns her head slightly. She hasn't been called that name in 3 years. The fluorescent lights in the trauma bay hummed with the same tired frequency they always did. Alina Reyes moved through the corridor with her head down, a clipboard pressed against her chest. Her scrubs faded from too many industrial washes. She had worked the night shift at St. Vincent Medical Center for 3 years. 3 years of being invisible. 3 years of being just another face in faded blue scrubs, another nurse the doctors didn't bother learning the name of. She preferred it that way. The ER was unusually calm for a Friday night. A few drunks in the waiting room, a kid with a broken arm, an elderly woman with chest pain being monitored in Bay 3. Alina checked vitals, updated charts, restocked supplies. She worked with the kind of efficiency that came from muscle memory, from doing the same tasks over and over until they required no thought at all. The doctors barely acknowledged her. The residents treated her like furniture. She had learned not to correct them anymore, even when they were wrong. It wasn't worth the fight. At 2300 hours, the ambulance bay doors exploded inward. Paramedics rushed in with a gurney, shouting over each other. Alina looked up from her station. Blood. Too much of it. The patient was a male, mid-30s, GSW to the upper chest. His face was pale, lips already tinged blue. One paramedic was doing compressions. Another was squeezing a bag valve mask with frantic rhythm. Alina moved toward them without thinking, her body already in motion before her mind caught up. "Trauma 1 now," a resident shouted, sprinting alongside the gurney. The team swarmed. Doctors barked orders, nurses scrambled for equipment. Alina slipped into the room quietly, positioning herself at the foot of the bed. She didn't speak, she just watched. The patient's chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular gasps. His right arm hung limp off the side of the gurney, fingers curled inward. Alina's eyes tracked down to his forearm. There it was. A tattoo, black ink, faded but unmistakable. 75th Ranger Regiment, scroll and tab her breath caught, just for a second. Then she locked it down, she scanned the rest of him. Scars on his knuckles, rope-burn calluses on his palms, the way his jaw was set even in unconsciousness like his body refused to quit. This wasn't some gang shooting. This wasn't random violence. This was something else. Get a central line in, type and cross for 6 units, someone page surgery. The senior resident, Dr. Maida, was moving fast, but his hands were shaking. He was good, but he was young, and he was panicking. Alina stepped forward. "Doctor, his breathing pattern not now," Maida snapped without looking at her. "I need pressure on that bleed, not commentary." Alina's jaw tightened. She stepped back. One of the other nurses glanced at her with something like sympathy, but said nothing. Alina crossed her arms and stayed where she was, eyes fixed on the patient. His respiratory rate was climbing. Shallow, rapid, compensating. She knew what that meant. Tension pneumothorax. The bullet had clipped his lung. If they didn't decompress it in the next 2 minutes, he'd arrest. "Doctor," she said again, louder this time. "He needs a needle decompression, right side." Second intercostal space. Maida turned, irritation flashing across his face. "I'm aware of how to manage a chest wound, thank you. We're prepping for a chest tube. There's no time, excuse me." Alina took one step closer, keeping her voice level. "His trachea is deviating. Breath sounds are absent on the right. He's compensating now, but in 60 seconds he's going to code. You need to decompress." Now Maida stared at her. For a moment the room hung in silence. Then he turned away. "Someone get her out of here." Alina didn't move. She looked down at the patient again. His lips were darker now. His pulse ox was dropping. 89, 86. The monitor started beeping. "BP's crashing." One of the nurses shouted, made a cursed and grabbed a needle decompression kit. His hands fumbled with the packaging. Alina watched, her fingers twitching at her sides. Every instinct in her body screamed to move, to take over, to do what needed to be done. But she didn't. She stayed still. She stayed quiet. She had made a promise to herself 3 years ago. No more commands, no more authority, no more Captain Ray's. Maida finally got the needle in. There was a hiss of air. The patient's chest expanded. His oxygen levels started to climb. Maida exhaled, relief washing over his face. He didn't look at Alina, didn't thank her. Just moved on to the next task. Alina turned and walked out of the trauma bay. She moved down the hallway, past the vending machines, past the staff lockers, and into the break room. She sat down in the dark, her hands resting on her knees. She stared at the floor. Her heart was pounding, but her face showed nothing. She had been out for 3 years. 3 years since she'd left the regiment. 3 years since she'd traded body armor for scrubs, battlefields for hospital floors. She had wanted quiet. She had wanted normal. She had wanted to disappear, but some things didn't disappear. Some things stayed in your blood. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath. Outside, she heard the distant wail of sirens. Another ambulance, another crisis, another shift. She stood up, smoothed her scrubs, and walked back into the light. Alina was restocking the crash cart when she heard the sound. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was wrong. The low rumble of heavy vehicles pulling into the ambulance bay, not ambulances, something else. She paused, her hand hovering over a drawer of intubation supplies, and listened. Engines idling, doors opening and closing in rapid succession, boots on pavement. Too many boots. She walked to the window and looked out. 3 black SUVs were parked in a tight formation near the emergency entrance. Men were stepping out, 6 of them, maybe more. They wore civilian clothes, jeans, jackets, baseball caps, but Alina could see what others wouldn't. The way they moved, the way they scanned, the bulges under their jackets, plate carriers, sidearms. These weren't cops, these weren't private security. These were operators. Her pulse quickened. She kept her face blank and stepped away from the window. The ER doors opened. The men walked in. They didn't announce themselves, didn't stop at the front desk. They moved as a unit, fanning out with the kind of silent coordination that only came from years of working together. Hospital security, 2 overweight guards in wrinkled uniforms, stepped forward, hands raised. "Gentlemen, you can't." Just one of the men held up a hand. The guard stopped talking. The man didn't say a word. He just looked at him. That was enough. The guard took a step back. Alina watched from the hallway, half hidden behind a supply cart. She studied them, their posture, their spacing, the way the lead man kept his right hand near his waistband, the way another was watching the stairwell. They were looking for something. Or someone. A nurse at the station whispered to another, "Who are they?" "I don't know. Should we call someone?" "Call who?" Alina moved down the hallway, her steps measured, unhurried. She passed the radiology wing, the pharmacy, the nurses' lounge. She knew every corner of this hospital, every exit, every blind spot. Old habits. She hated that they were coming back. She turned a corner and nearly collided with one of them. He was younger than the others, mid-20s, clean-shaven. His eyes were sharp, alert. He stopped. So did she. For a moment they stood 3 feet apart, neither moving. Alina kept her expression neutral, her hands loose at her sides. The man's eyes flicked down to her ID badge, then back to her face. He didn't apologize, didn't step aside. He was reading her. She knew because she was doing the same to him. Then, without thinking, Alina's right hand moved, just slightly. 2 fingers extended, thumb tucked. A signal, flat, controlled, friendly. "Stand down." The man's eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second. Then his jaw tightened. He took half a step back and tilted his head, studying her more carefully now. Alina cursed at herself silently. Stupid. Sloppy. She hadn't used that signal in 3 years, and now it had slipped out like reflex. She walked past him without a word. She could feel his eyes on her back. She didn't turn around. The ICU was on the 3rd floor. Alina took the stairs, moving quickly now. Her mind was racing. The ranger patient. The men downstairs. This wasn't a coincidence. Rangers didn't roll into civilian hospitals with armed security unless something had gone very, very wrong. Either the patient was high value, or he was in danger. Maybe both. She pushed through the ICU doors. The unit was quieter than the ER, dimmer. Machines beeped in rhythm. A nurse looked up from her computer. "Alina. What are you doing up here?" "Checking on the GSW from earlier. He's stable." Maida moved him to Bay 6. Alina nodded and walked past her. Bay 6 was at the end of the hall, separated by a sliding glass door. She could see the patient through the glass. He was intubated now, sedated, hooked up to a dozen monitors. His chest rose and fell with the ventilator. Alive. For now. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She moved to the side of the bed and looked down at him. His face was still pale, but the color was better than before. She checked the monitor, heart rate steady, blood pressure holding. Someone had done good work. Maybe Maida had listened after all. She glanced at the chart hanging on the wall. Name, John Doe. No ID, no wallet, no phone. That wasn't unusual for trauma cases, but Alina knew better. This wasn't a John Doe. This was a ranger, and someone had tried to kill him. The door slid open behind her. Alina turned. One of the men from downstairs stood in the doorway. He was older than the others, 40, maybe 45, gray at the temples. His face was weathered, scarred along the jawline. He wore a dark jacket and jeans, but his eyes were all business. He looked at Alina, then at the patient, then back at Alina. You his nurse? He asked. His voice was low, gravelly. A nurse, Alina said carefully. The man stepped inside. Another followed. Then another. 3 of them now, forming a loose perimeter around the bed. The older man moved closer to Alina, his eyes never leaving her face. We need to move him, he said. He's not stable enough to move. That wasn't a request. Alina met his gaze. She didn't blink. I don't care, you move him now. He dies. The man's eyes narrowed. He studied her for a long moment. Then he glanced at one of the others, a younger man with a tactical watch and a faint scar across his eyebrow. The younger man gave a small nod. The older man turned back to Alina. Who are you? I told you I'm a nurse, no. He stepped closer. You signaled Vargas downstairs, clean, precise muscle memory, so I'll ask again, who are you? Alina's chest tightened. She could feel the weight of the moment. She could lie. She could walk away. She could keep the mask on. But the patient's monitor beeped softly behind her, and she knew there wasn't time for games. She took a slow breath. My name is Alina Reyes. The older man's expression didn't change. But something shifted in his eyes. Recognition. He straightened slightly, his posture shifting from interrogation to something else. Respect, Captain Reyes, he said quietly. Alina didn't correct him. She didn't confirm it either. She just held his gaze. One of the younger men took a half step forward, his mouth open like he wanted to say something. The older man raised a hand, stopping him. He looked at Alina for another long moment, then nodded once. We'll hold position, he said. But we need to talk. Alina glanced at the patient, then back at the rangers. Not here. She walked past them, out of the ICU, down the hallway to an empty consultation room. The older man followed. The door closed behind them. Alina turned to face him, her arms crossed. What happened to him? She asked, ambushed 2 hours ago. He was running solo surveillance on a target in the city. Someone made him. He took fire, got out, called for extract. We found him bleeding out in an alley. Who's the target? That's classified. Then why are you here? The man hesitated. Because the target knows he's alive. And he knows where he is. Alina's jaw tightened. You brought a hit to my hospital. We didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. The man's eyes hardened. With respect, Captain, you've been out for 3 years. You don't know what's happening out there anymore. Alina stared at him. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him he was wrong. But she didn't, because he was right. She had walked away. She had chosen quiet. She had chosen normal. And now normal was about to get very loud. She exhaled slowly. How long until they move on him? Hours, maybe less. Then we don't have much time. The man nodded. No, ma'am, we don't. Alina turned toward the door, then paused. What's your name? Sergeant First Class Dalton. She looked back at him. Dalton, get your men into defensive positions. No visible weapons. Blend in and keep the hospital staff out of this. Dalton's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Yes, ma'am. Alina walked out of the room. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. But inside, something old and sharp was waking up. Alina was halfway back to the ICU when the alarm started. The shrill, rapid beeping of a code. Her body moved before her mind registered it. She broke into a run, her shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Behind her she heard Boots, Dalton and his men following close. She burst through the ICU doors. Bay 6. The monitors were screaming. The patient was crashing. His heart rate spiked, then plummeted. Blood pressure dropping fast. A nurse was fumbling with the crash cart, hands shaking. Dr. Maida was at the bedside, eyes wide, frozen for just a second too long. Alina didn't slow down. She shoved past a resident and moved to the head of the bed. What happened? I don't know, Maida's voice cracked. He was stable, then his pressure just tanked. Alina's eyes scanned the monitors. Oxygen saturation falling, 78%, 74. The ventilator was cycling, but something was wrong. She looked at the patient's chest. It wasn't rising evenly. The right side was lagging. Again, he's recollapsed, Alina said, her voice sharp and clear. The chest tube isn't holding. He needs another decompression. Now Maida reached for a needle kit, but his hands were trembling. He dropped it. The package skittered across the floor. He bent to pick it up, and Alina saw it. He was panicking. He was good in theory, but this wasn't theory. This was a man dying in front of him, and he was losing control. Alina stepped forward. "Doctor, let me... I've got it." Maida snapped, his voice high and defensive, the monitor flatlined. The high-pitched whine of asystole filled the room. Someone gasped. The nurse with the crash cart looked like she might cry. Alina's hand shot out. She grabbed Maida's wrist, firm but not rough. Her voice dropped, cold and level. "Step back." Maida looked at her, stunned. For a moment he seemed ready to argue. Then something in Alina's eyes stopped him. He stepped aside. Alina moved into position. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for approval. Her hands moved with the kind of speed and precision that came from doing this 100 times in worse conditions. She grabbed the needle decompression kit from the crash cart, tore it open with her teeth, and positioned herself over the patient's right side. Second intercostal space, midclavicular line. She palpated quickly, found the landmark, and drove the needle in without hesitation. There was a hiss, air escaping. The patient's chest expanded. The monitor flickered. A rhythm returned. Faint but there. Alina didn't stop. She called out orders, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Bag him. Manual ventilation, slow and steady. Someone check the chest tube, make sure it's not kinked. I need a liter of saline wide open and another unit of blood on standby." The nurses moved. They didn't question her. They just did what she said. Maida stood to the side, his mouth half open, his face pale. Alina didn't look at him. She was entirely focused on the patient. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling the rise and fall, counting the breaths. 30 seconds, 1 minute. The rhythm stabilized. Blood pressure started climbing. 80 over 50. 90 over 60. The monitor beeped steadily now, no longer screaming. Alina exhaled. She stepped back, pulling off her gloves. Her hands were steady. Her face showed nothing. Then she heard it. A voice from behind her, quiet but firm, let her work. She turned. Dalton was standing just inside the doorway, his arms crossed. 2 more Rangers flanked him. They weren't pointing weapons. They weren't making threats. They were just standing there, but their presence filled the room, the kind of presence that didn't need volume. One of the residents opened his mouth to protest, but the words died in his throat when he saw their faces. Maida finally found his voice. "Who the hell are you people?" Dalton ignored him. His eyes were on Alina. "Captain." The room went silent. Every nurse, every resident, every person in that ICU turned to look at Alina. She stood at the bedside, her scrubs wrinkled and blood-stained, her hair tied back in a messy knot. She didn't look like a captain. She didn't look like anything except tired, but Dalton was looking at her like she was still in command. Alina's jaw tightened. "Sergeant, not here. With respect, ma'am, they need to know." "Know what?" Maida's voice was shrill now, defensive. "Someone want to explain what's going on?" Alina turned to face him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The patient is military. These men are his unit. They're here to protect him. Protect him from what? From whoever put a bullet in his chest. Maida blinked. "This is a hospital, not a war zone. We have protocols, security. You can't just..." One of the younger Rangers stepped forward. His name tape read VARGAS. He was the one Alina had signaled downstairs. He looked at Maida with something close to contempt. "Doc, I don't think you understand. That man in the bed is one of ours. And the woman who just saved his life, she's not just a nurse." Maida looked at Alina. "What is he talking about?" Alina didn't answer. She turned back to the patient, checking his IV line, adjusting the ventilator settings. She worked in silence, her movements efficient and mechanical. She could feel the eyes on her. The weight of the room, the questions forming in everyone's minds. Dalton moved closer to the bed. He stood beside Alina, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "We've got eyes on the building." Vargas spotted 2 possibles in the parking garage. No confirmation yet, but they're circling. Alina's hands didn't stop moving. How long? Could be minutes, could be hours. They're waiting for something, an opening. Yes, ma'am. Alina finished adjusting the IV and stepped back. She looked at Dalton, then at the rest of the Rangers. They were watching her, waiting. Not for orders, she wasn't their commander anymore, but for something, direction, confirmation, permission, she turned to Vargas. You said two possibles. Where's your overwatch? Rooftop. Southeast corner. Hendricks has thermals and comms. What's your fallback if they breach the building? Stairwell B, we collapse to the ICU and hold. Alina shook her head. No, you'll get boxed in. Stairwell C has roof access. If they come, you move the patient there. I'll buy you time, Vargas frowned. Ma'am, with respect, you're not I know what I am, Sergeant. Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight. And I know what this building looks like under fire. You don't. Vargas looked at Dalton. Dalton studied Alina for a long moment, then he nodded. She's right. We adjust. One of the other Rangers, a stocky man with a shaved head and a scar through his eyebrow, stepped forward. Captain Reyes, it's an honor, ma'am. Alina looked at him. She didn't smile. What's your name, specialist? Chen, ma'am. Chen, I need you to sweep the 3rd and 4th floors. Look for access points, service elevators, maintenance corridors, anything that bypasses the main entrances. Yes, ma'am. He left immediately, no hesitation. Alina turned to the rest of them. Dalton, keep 2 men on this floor. Rotate every 2 hours. No visible weapons, but stay ready. Vargas, you're with me. We're going to talk to hospital security. Security. Meta finally spoke up again, his voice shaking. What are you planning? Alina looked at him. Her expression softened just slightly. Doctor, you did good work tonight, but this isn't your fight. Keep your staff clear of the ICU. If something happens, get them to the basement and stay there. You can't just take over my hospital. I'm not taking over anything. Alina's voice was calm but firm. I'm trying to keep people alive. She walked past him toward the door. Vargas fell in step beside her. Dalton and the others moved into position, silent and efficient. The nurses watched them go, too stunned to speak. One of them, an older woman named Karen who'd worked with Alina for 2 years, finally whispered, Who is she? Maida didn't answer. He just stared at the patient, then at the doorway where Alina had disappeared. His hands were still shaking. In the hallway, Alina moved quickly, her mind already 3 steps ahead. Vargas kept pace beside her, his eyes scanning doorways, corners, shadows. Ma'am, he said quietly, we heard you got out, went civilian. I did. Why? Alina didn't answer right away. She stopped at the nurse's station, grabbed a hospital phone and dialed security. While it rang, she glanced at Vargas. Because I was tired, Sergeant. And I wanted to sleep without wondering who I'd have to kill tomorrow. Vargas didn't respond. He just nodded. The phone clicked. A groggy voice answered. Security. Alina's tone shifted, calm. Professional, authoritative. This is Nurse Reyes, ICU. We have a credible threat situation. I need all entry points monitored. No one enters the 3rd floor without clearance. And I need you to pull the feeds from the parking garage for the last 2 hours. What? Who authorized? Do it now. She hung up. Vargas raised an eyebrow. You think they'll actually listen? No, Alina said. But it'll buy us time. She turned and walked toward the stairwell. Vargas followed. Behind them, the ICU doors slid shut. Inside, the patient's heart monitor beeped steadily. Alive. For now. But Alina knew the clock was ticking. The hospital security office smelled like stale coffee and cheap air freshener. 2 guards sat at a bank of monitors, half asleep, watching grainy black and white feeds from cameras scattered across the building. Alina walked in without knocking. Vargas stayed outside, watching the hallway. The older guard looked up, startled. Hey, you can't just... Alina cut him off. Rewind the parking garage feed, last 2 hours. I need to see everyone who entered. The guard blinked. Lady, I don't know who you think you are, but Alina leaned forward, her hands flat on the desk. Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes were ice. There are armed men in this building hunting a patient. You can either help me find them, or you can explain to the families why you didn't. The guard stared at her. Then he looked at his partner. The younger one shrugged nervously. The older guard sighed and turned to the keyboard. What am I looking for? 2 men, possibly 3. They'll be alone, moving deliberately, not rushing. Watching, the guard scrolled through the footage. Cars pulling in, families leaving, a delivery truck, an ambulance, then there, a dark sedan. 2 men stepped out. Both wore jackets despite the mild weather. Both had their hands in their pockets. They didn't go toward the ER entrance. They went toward the service door near radiology. Alina pointed. Freeze that. The image stopped. She studied their faces. One was white, mid-40s, buzzcut. The other was younger, Hispanic, clean-shaven. Neither looked military. But they moved like they'd had training. Professional, controlled. Where does that service door lead? Alina asked, radiology. Then it connects to the main corridor on the second floor. Is it locked? Should be. Keycard access only. Alina straightened. They're already inside. The guard's face went pale. What? Alina was already moving. She stepped into the hallway and keyed her radio. One of the rangers had given her a spare unit. Dalton, 2 hostiles, already in the building. Second floor, radiology wing. Buzzcut and clean-shaven, armed and mobile. Dalton's voice came back immediately. Copy, adjusting positions now. Vargas was beside her in seconds. Orders, lockdown protocol. I need all stairwell doors on the second and third floors secured. Chen should be on 4. Tell him to hold position and watch the roof access. No one goes in or out without eyes on them. And you. Alina started walking toward the stairwell. I'm going to radiology. Ma'am, I'm not asking. Vargas. He hesitated, then nodded. I'm coming with you. They moved quickly but didn't run. Running drew attention. Alina kept her expression neutral, her pace measured, just another nurse on another shift, but her mind was racing. 2 hostiles inside meant more outside. This wasn't a smash and grab. This was coordinated. Surgical. They reached the stairwell and descended to the second floor. Alina paused at the door, listening. Nothing. She cracked it open. The hallway was empty. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The radiology wing was to the left, a long corridor lined with patient rooms and imaging suites. Vargas moved ahead of her, his hand hovering near his waistband. Alina knew he was carrying, even though hospital policy forbade it. Right now, she was grateful. They moved down the hallway in silence. Alina scanned doorways, corners, shadows. Her training had never left her. It was like breathing. You didn't forget how a door opened ahead of them. A nurse stepped out, pushing a wheelchair. She saw Alina and smiled. Hey, Alina. What are you doing down here? Alina forced a smile back. Just checking on a transfer. You seen anyone unusual tonight? The nurse frowned. Unusual how? 2 men, not staff, not visitors. Oh. Yeah, actually, 2 guys went past here maybe 10 minutes ago. I thought they were with maintenance, but they didn't have badges. Alina's chest tightened. Which way? The nurse pointed down the hall. Toward the service elevator. Alina nodded. Thanks. Get back to the nurse's station and stay there. The nurse's smile faded. Is something wrong? Just do it. Please. The nurse hesitated, then nodded and hurried away. Alina turned to Vargas. Service elevator goes straight to 3. They're going for the patient. Not yet. They're scouting. Testing our response time. Jaw tightened. Then we need to move. They reached the service elevator. The doors were closed. Alina checked the indicator. It was stopped on the 3rd floor. She looked at Vargas. He was already reaching for his sidearm. Alina shook her head. Not here. Too many civilians. Ma'am, we do this my way, Sergeant. Vargas exhaled slowly, then nodded. Alina keyed her radio. Dalton, hostiles are on 3, service elevator. I need you to lock down the ICU. No one in or out. And get the patient ready to move. Copy. Where are you? 2nd floor. I'm coming up the east stairwell. If they make contact, do not engage unless fired upon. We don't know how many there are. Understood. Alina turned to Vargas. You stay here. Watch this elevator. If anyone comes down, detain them. No shots unless absolutely necessary. You're going up alone? Going up quiet. Vargas didn't like it. She could see it in his face. But he was a ranger. He knew how to follow orders. Yes, ma'am. Alina moved back to the stairwell. She climbed slowly, her footsteps silent on the concrete steps. Her heart was pounding, but her breathing stayed even. She reached the 3rd floor and paused at the door. She could hear voices, muffled, tense. She cracked the door and looked through. The hallway was empty except for 2 figures standing near the ICU entrance. Both wore jackets. Both had their backs to her. One was speaking into a cell phone. The other was watching the ICU doors. Alina stepped into the hallway. She walked toward them, her hands loose at her sides, her stride unhurried. Just another nurse. Just another face. The man on the phone turned. He saw her. His eyes narrowed. He said something into the phone and ended the call. Then he stepped toward her, blocking her path. Excuse me, Alina said, her voice calm and polite. You need to clear this area. We're in lockdown. The man didn't move. He was bigger up close. 6'2", maybe 220. His jacket was unzipped just enough that Alina could see the outline of a shoulder holster. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Lockdown," he said. His accent was faint. "Eastern European, maybe. We were not informed." "Informing you now." The second man moved closer. He was smaller, wiry, with cold eyes and a scar running down his left cheek. He looked Alina up and down, assessing her. "You are nurse?" "Yes, you have patient here, trauma, gunshot." Alina's expression didn't change. "We have several trauma patients." "This is a hospital." The bigger man stepped closer. He was in her space now, trying to intimidate her. "We are looking for someone specific. Male, 30s, military." Alina held his gaze. "I don't discuss patient information." Hip of the man's smile faded. "This is not request." "Then it's still not happening." The scarred man reached under his jacket. Alina saw the movement. Her body reacted before her mind did. She stepped forward, closing the distance, and drove her palm into the man's solar plexus. He gasped and staggered back. The bigger man reached for his gun, but Alina was already moving. She grabbed his wrist, twisted hard, and drove her knee into his thigh. He grunted and dropped to one knee. Behind her, the ICU doors burst open. Dalton and 2 Rangers came out, weapons drawn but low. The scarred man froze, his hand still under his jacket. The bigger man looked up at Alina, fury and shock warring on his face. Alina didn't let go of his wrist. She leaned down, her voice low and cold. "You need to leave." Now the man spat something in a language Alina didn't recognize. She twisted his wrist harder. He hissed in pain. Dalton stepped forward, his weapon raised now. "On the ground." "Both of you." The scarred man slowly raised his hands. The bigger man glared at Alina, but he complied. Dalton and the Rangers moved in, zip-tying their wrists with quick, practiced efficiency. Within 30 seconds, both men were face down on the floor. Alina stepped back, her hands still steady. She looked at Dalton. "We need to move the patient. Now." Dalton nodded. "Chen's already prepping the roof access. We've got a bird inbound, 10 minutes out. What about the rest of them?" Hendricks counted 4 more outside. "They're holding position, waiting for a signal." Alina looked down at the 2 men on the floor. They just got their signal. As if on cue, the lights in the hallway flickered. Then they went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in dim red. Someone had cut the power, Dalton cursed. "They're coming." Alina's voice was calm. "Get the patient to the roof." "I'll slow them down." "Ma'am, you can't." Alina turned to face him. Her eyes were hard. "Sergeant, this is my hospital. These are my people. I'm not leaving them." Dalton stared at her. For a moment she thought he might argue, then he nodded. 2 minutes, then we're gone, with or without you." Understood. Dalton and the Rangers moved back into the ICU. Alina heard the sound of a gurney moving, wheels squeaking on the tile. She turned toward the stairwell. Somewhere below she heard a door slam, footsteps, fast and heavy. Alina took a slow breath. She walked to the nurse's station and picked up the phone. She dialed security. "This is Ray's, 3rd floor. We have an active threat. Evacuate all non-essential personnel to the basement." "Lock the doors. Do not let anyone in." She hung up before they could respond. Then she moved to the stairwell door and waited. The footsteps were closer now. 3 flights down. 2. 1. The door burst open. A man came through, weapon raised. Alina didn't hesitate. She kicked the door back into him. He stumbled. She grabbed his wrist, twisted, and slammed his hand against the wall. The gun clattered to the floor. She drove her elbow into his jaw. He dropped. Another man came through the door. Alina spun, her leg sweeping low. He went down hard. She kicked the gun away and stepped back, breathing hard now. 2 more came through. Alina's hand shot out, grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it. The metal cylinder connected with the first man's head. He crumpled. The second man lunged at her. She sidestepped, let him overextend, and drove her knee into his ribs. He gasped and fell. Alina stood in the red-lit hallway, surrounded by 4 unconscious men. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up. She looked at the fire extinguisher in her hand, then dropped it. It hit the floor with a dull clang. She heard the sound of rotor blades. The helicopter. She turned and ran toward the roof access. The stairwell was narrow, dark. She climbed 2 steps at a time. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed. But she didn't stop. She burst through the roof door. The night air hit her like a slap. The helicopter was descending, its spotlight cutting through the darkness. Dalton and his team were loading the patient, moving with controlled urgency. Vargas saw Alina and waved her over. She ran across the rooftop. Dalton grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the helicopter. We need to go, Elena shook her head. I'm staying. They'll kill you. They'll kill more people if I don't secure the building. Dalton's face was hard, then he nodded once. He reached into his vest and pulled out a sidearm. He pressed it into her hand. 2 minutes, Captain. Then we're out of range and you're on your own. Elena took the weapon. I know. The helicopter lifted off. The rotor wash nearly knocked Elena off her feet. She shielded her face and watched as it climbed into the night sky. The patient was safe. The Rangers were clear. Now it was just her. She turned and walked back to the stairwell. Her hand gripped the sidearm. She chambered around. The sound was loud in the silence. Somewhere below she heard sirens. Police. Finally, Elena descended into the red-lit darkness. The hospital waited, and so did she. The police arrived in force. 6 cruisers, lights flashing, flooding the parking lot with red and blue strobes. Elena watched from the 3rd-floor window as officers poured out, weapons drawn, moving toward the entrances in tactical formation. She stood in the shadows. The sidearm Dalton had given her tucked into the back of her waistband, hidden beneath her scrub top. She took a slow breath and walked toward the stairwell. Her legs felt heavy now, the adrenaline draining out of her system and leaving exhaustion in its wake. Her hands were steady, but her chest ached. Not from the fight, from something deeper. Something older. She descended the stairs slowly, listening. The sounds of chaos had faded. No more gunfire, no more shouting. Just the muffled crackle of police radios and the distant wail of more sirens approaching. The hospital was still standing. The people inside were still alive. That was what mattered. On the 2nd floor, she passed 2 EMTs loading one of the unconscious men onto a stretcher. His face was swollen where her elbow had connected with his jaw. A police officer stood nearby taking notes. He looked up as Elena passed. You see what happened here? He asked. Elena shook her head. I was upstairs. I heard the commotion and stayed clear. The officer nodded and went back to his notes. Elena kept walking. Her face showed nothing, just another nurse. Just another witness. She reached the 1st floor and moved through the ER. It was packed now. Patients, staff, police, all crammed into the waiting area. A senior officer was interviewing Dr. Maida near the nurse's station. Maida looked pale, exhausted, his hands gesturing wildly as he tried to explain what he'd seen. Elena caught a fragment of his words. And then she just took over, and these men, they called her captain, and I don't understand. The officer said something Elena couldn't hear. Maida shook his head, still talking. Elena turned away. She walked past them, past the chaos, and pushed through the doors into the ambulance bay. The night air was cool and clean. She stood there for a moment, her eyes closed, just breathing. She opened her eyes. A man in a dark suit stood a few feet away. Mid-40s, graying hair, the kind of face that had seen too much. He held up a badge, Federal. She couldn't see the agency from this distance, but it didn't matter. She knew the type. You're the nurse, he said. It wasn't a question, yes. The one who stopped 4 armed men in a stairwell with a fire extinguisher. Elena didn't respond. The man studied her. That's not normal nurse behavior. It was self-defense. He stepped closer. I talked to the Rangers off the record. They said you used to be one of them. I used to be a lot of things. Captain Elena Reyes, 75th Ranger Regiment, 3 Tour, Silver Star. You got out 3 years ago. Medical discharge officially, but the paperwork's thin, real thin. Elena met his gaze. Is there a question in there? The man smiled, but it was cold. Just wondering why someone with your background is working night shifts in a civilian, or because I wanted to. And tonight I did my job. The man watched her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Fair enough, we'll need a statement, but not tonight. You look like you need sleep. I'm fine. No, you're not. He handed her a card. Call that number tomorrow, we'll talk. Elena took the card. She didn't look at it, she just slipped it into her pocket. The man turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, you saved a lot of lives tonight. Elena didn't respond. The man walked away, disappearing into the crowd of police and federal agents. Elena stood alone in the ambulance bay, the flashing lights painting her face in alternating shades of red and blue. She pulled the sidearm from her waistband and looked at it. Dalton's weapon. She should return it, but Dalton was gone. The Rangers were gone. The patient was gone. She was the only one left. She walked to her locker in the staff break room. The hospital was quieter now, the initial chaos settling into the slow grind of cleanup and investigation. She opened her locker and placed the sidearm inside. covering it with a spare set of scrubs. She'd figure out how to return it later. She sat down on the bench and stared at her hands. They were clean now. She'd washed them twice. But she could still feel the impact of her strikes, the way the fire extinguisher had vibrated when it connected with bone. She could still see the faces of the men she'd taken down. Professional, trained, dangerous, and she'd stopped them. She closed her eyes. For 3 years, she'd tried to forget what it felt like. The clarity, the focus, the way everything sharpened when lives were on the line. She'd wanted normal. She'd wanted quiet. She'd wanted to be just another nurse in just another hospital. But tonight had proven what she'd always feared. Some things didn't fade. Some things stayed in your blood. Footsteps approached. Elena opened her eyes. A young nurse stood in the doorway. Her name was Amy. She'd been hired 6 months ago, fresh out of school. Her eyes were red from crying. Elena, her voice was small. "Are you okay?" Elena forced a tired smile. "I'm fine, are you?" Amy nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again. "I don't know, what happened tonight? Who were those men and doctor?" Maida said Amy. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "It's over, everyone's safe, that's all that matters, but he said you were military, that you were a captain." Elena stood. She walked over to Amy and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I was, a long time ago, but I'm not anymore, I'm just a nurse, like you." Amy looked at her, searching her face for something. Truth, maybe. Or reassurance. Elena wasn't sure which. After a moment, Amy nodded. "Okay, go home, get some rest. I'll see you tomorrow night." Amy left. Elena watched her go, then turned back to her locker. She pulled out her jacket and slipped it on. Her shift wasn't over for another 2 hours, but she needed air. She needed space. She walked through the hospital corridors one more time. The police were still there, still interviewing staff, still processing the scene. Elena avoided them. She took the back hallways, the service corridors she knew by heart. She reached the east exit and pushed through the door. The parking lot was nearly empty now. Most of the police had moved inside. A few cruisers remained, their lights still flashing. Elena walked toward her car, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She stopped. Someone was standing beside her car. A figure in the shadows. Elena's hand moved instinctively toward her waist, but the sidearm wasn't there. She left it in her locker. She tensed, ready to move, ready to fight if she had to. The figure stepped into the light. It was Vargas. Elena exhaled. "Sergeant, I thought you left." "I did." Vargas's face was serious. "Then I came back." "Why?" He stepped closer. Then slowly, deliberately, he came to attention. His right hand snapped up in a crisp salute. "Because I wanted to thank you, ma'am." Elena stared at him. Her throat tightened. She didn't move, didn't speak. Vargas held the salute. "You saved his life. You saved all of us tonight." Elena's jaw clenched. She wanted to tell him to stop. She wanted to tell him she wasn't a captain anymore, that she'd given up that life, that she didn't deserve his respect. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she did the only thing she could. She returned the salute, slowly, precisely. One last time, Vargas lowered his hand. He nodded once, then turned and walked away. Elena watched him disappear into the darkness. She stood alone in the parking lot, her hand still raised, frozen in the salute. Then she lowered it. She got into her car and sat in the driver's seat, staring at the steering wheel. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear, from something else. Something she couldn't name. She gripped the wheel until her knuckles turned white. Then she let go. She started the engine and drove home. The sun was rising when Elena returned to the hospital the next evening. She walked through the main entrance, her ID badge clipped to her scrubs, her face neutral. The ER was busy, the usual Friday night chaos bleeding into Saturday morning. No one looked at her differently. No one mentioned the night before. She checked the schedule. Her assignment was the same as always, Trauma Bay, night shift. 12 hours, she grabbed a coffee from the break room and walked to the nurse's station. Dr. Maida was there, reviewing charts. He looked up when she approached. For a moment, neither of them spoke, then Maida cleared his throat. "Raise, doctor," he hesitated. "About last night, I wanted to." Elena shook her head. "It's better if you don't." Maida stared at her. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, he nodded. "Okay." Elena picked up her patient assignments and walked away. Behind her, she heard Maida let out a long breath. The shift passed like any other. Patients came and went. Broken bones, chest pain, overdoses, routine, normal. Elena moved through it all with the same quiet efficiency she always had. Just another nurse. Just another night. At midnight, she took her break. She walked to the roof access, the same one the Rangers had used, and stepped outside. The city sprawled below her, lights flickering in the darkness. The air was cool and still. She stood at the edge and looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there, the patient was recovering. The Rangers were moving on to their next mission. The threat was neutralized. The story was over, but Alina knew better. Stories like this didn't end. They just faded. They became scars. They became the weight you carried in silence. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the card the federal agent had given her. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she tore it in half. And again, she let the pieces fall from her hand, scattering in the wind. She turned and walked back inside. The hospital doors closed behind her. The lights were bright. The monitors beeped. The work continued. Alina Reyes went back to her station, pulled on a fresh pair of gloves, and disappeared into the rhythm of the shift. Just another nurse, just another face. Invisible once more, but somewhere deep inside, in a place she would never speak of, the captain was still awake. Still watching, still ready, and she always would be.